This is A New Angle, a show about cool people doing awesome things in and around Montana. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today, I'm speaking with Youpa Stein, the co-chair of the Families for a Livable Climate Plastics Working Group, and an activist for MT Plastic Free Missoula.
One of the arguments we've heard in policy work, let the consumers drive the choice. And
sure.
So one of my questions is that if we don't have choices, how can that happen?
Right. Youpa is an activist, artist, volunteer, and a fierce advocate for removing plastics from our world. Youpa, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So tell us, where did you grow up and what did your parents do?
I was born in Missoula,
Yeah.
Montana. My dad graduated from the forestry department, and my mom graduated from nursing school at St. Pat's.
Wonderful.
And then when I was 9 months old, we moved to Petersburg, Alaska, which is in southeast Alaska. And I lived there for 10 years. And then we moved to the Kootenai Ranger District. My dad was a forest ranger.
Okay.
And the Kootenai is it's north of Whitefish, pretty big district, lots of lakes. So I lived there until I was 18 and then came to school here at the university.
And you came here for a fine arts degree at the University of Montana?
I did,
Yeah.
yes. I was in the acting and directing program.
Yeah, and then I noticed you did graduate work in drama therapy,
Yes.
which caught my attention. Tell us about drama therapy. What is that?
It was a graduate degree in psychology.
Okay.
And the sort of more fine-tuned focus was drama therapy. And I'd actually I'd performed and taught as an adjunct here at the university, taught intro to acting classes. And one of the things that moved me was these large groups of very diverse, very different experiences in the world,
Sure.
but to connect. And that was very compelling to me. I was reading one day and found this idea of using that art form to assist people in accessing their own wisdom and their own creativity in their process of whatever it is they were trying to get through.
Talk about the role that art plays in your life. I noticed you do all kinds of art. Talk about your work as an artist.
Evolving out of acting and directing and drama therapy, started working with people facing illness and loss and utilizing a variety of art forms, not therapy, but the intrinsic value of the arts in people's lives.
Okay.
And also saw this shift in people who found these parts of themselves. So they were not only a person experiencing cancer, they also had this wide range of who they were.
Yeah.
And they got to experience that or hold space for these other parts of themselves. So that was one piece. And then I started exploring visual arts personally, photography, and it became a way to connect with the natural world. It was a way to slow things down and find these moments. So I've been very curious about the role of beauty in how that affects us, how that moves us, how that inspires us, how that links us to our connection to the planet. So photography became a way to just deepen those opportunities to connect.
Sure.
So that connection piece has always been important, and I've seen its value. More lately, finding ways to bring my concerns and what I'm learning about the harms of plastics into a form that can speak beyond facts and figures to our emotions and our connection to people and places.
Let's talk about plastics. How did you get interested in plastics?
I have these 2 shampoo bottles that I've had for over 40 years.
Wow.
I started to just feel really uncomfortable with the amount of things that get used for a brief amount of time that will last for potentially hundreds of years. And I've learned so much more since then about other problems, and I'll get into that in a minute. But so that it started a while ago. But then about 2018, I started reading more and more about just the research and what we're starting to know and the impacts of plastics. Chris Jordan is an artist, filmmaker out of Seattle. And he did a film called The Albatross. And out in the Pacific Ocean, Midway Atoll, are these huge colony of albatross. And over 90% of the 320,000 albatross chicks that hatch on the island every year have plastic in their stomachs.
Wow.
And most of them die from it or suffer greatly. And the visual of this albatross chick with the body disintegrated and the stomach full of plastic was like in these pictures of mother albatross feeding plastic to their chick. It was like, this is wrong. It's simply wrong.
So that image really struck you.
So it did, and that kind of activated,
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I cannot know this and not take some action. I believe each of us has to find what that is and our responsibilities and where we are in our life. But for me, that was a tipping point. And then I started volunteering in a variety of ways, and I wear several volunteer hats in my plastics work.
So before we get into that work, though, just give us for a general audience, what is the state of play with plastics? Why is it a problem, and how big a problem is it?
Plastic pollutes and contributes to climate change at every stage.
Okay.
It's not just a waste problem. It's from extraction to production to use and after use.
The whole supply chain.
The whole, I've heard the word value chain.
Value
sometimes,
chain, sure.
Sometimes, and it disproportionately, it harms all life on the plastic. We found plastic everywhere we've looked, from the top of Mount Everest to the deepest part of the ocean, the Mariana Trench, where 72% of the amphipods they studied contain plastic fibers and fragments in their guts.
Yeah.
So and we found it almost everywhere we've looked in the human body. So deep in human lungs, in blood, testes, semen, placentas, and breast milk.
Everywhere.
Every scientist that I've heard speak, every researcher says, yes, there's a lot more we need to know. We don't know everything, but there's such compelling connection in what we're seeing that we must take action. So the other piece that I want to make sure to cover, looking at the climate piece, plastics are made from fossil fuels.
Yes.
99% of plastics, the ingredients are from fossil fuels. So the contribution to climate impacts and climate instability, it's currently greenhouse gas emissions from plastics are about 5.4%.
And how does that relate to burning of fossil fuels for energy, for example?
So that can be a piece, like the part of the production of plastics.
Okay.
It requires the cracking. Here's one example. The U.S. has a glut of fracking from natural gas. And a component of that, ethane, which can't be used for energy or it's too volatile. So that gets utilized as a base for making polymers.
Okay.
And so there's a variety of ways that greenhouse gases throughout that life cycle
and
of
you can see how
plastics.
that would work with gas. It's another contributor to the incentive system that leads to natural gas production.
Some of it's the energy used,
Yeah.
some of it's the materials themselves and the impacts on the environment that can create methane.
But you can see how these forces would compound in terms of their effects on climate change.
So right now it's like 4.5%, and the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory recently came out with an estimation without intervention. Plastics, depending on the growth rate, will be from 21 to 31% of the remaining carbon budget.
Okay.
So there's some looking at, some perspectives that plastics are the plan B for the fossil fuel energy, as the demand for fossil fuels used for energy and transportation goes down because of response to climate instability,
yes,
then more is being invested in plastics. So that's a piece of this equation.
Meaning the petrochemical industry
Yes.
shifting to developing
Yes.
more plastics
More
as an
plastics.
alternative strategy as consumers are maybe consuming less fossil fuel for energy.
Exactly. And
Okay.
so that projected, we're on track without intervention for production to be tripled by 2060.
Okay.
So that becomes
Wow.
a problem because of all the impacts in the earlier stages of plastics and the toxicities. There's a report that came out in March by the PlastChem is the group that came out, and they've identified 16,000 chemicals used in plastics. 4,200 of those are known carcinogens,
Okay.
neurotoxins, and endocrine disrupting chemicals.
So let's shift from climate to the health effects. You mentioned a few moments ago how pervasive plastics are. They seem to be everywhere in our bodies and in some of the most remote places on the planet. How is it bad for my health or anybody's health?
All plastics eventually degrade. They don't biodegrade because they're synthetically human-made materials.
Yeah.
And so we haven't evolved to metabolize them. But they're similar enough because they're from carbon,
organic
carbon
materials.
base, that the body, they can mimic hormones in the body, but they're different enough that the body can't quite deal with them. And so the harmful effects can include, in terms of neurotoxins, there's really convincing links between increased autism, ADHD, lower IQ. There's been a lot of work done around infertility and reproduction. There was a study in the New England Journal of Medicine.
Yeah.
What they found is 58% of the people in the study
Yeah.
that had microplastics, so tiny bits of plastic that had entered the human body through ingestion or breathing in, and that 58% had a 450-fold increase in having heart attack, stroke, or death within
Wow.
the next 3 years.
Okay. So a relational study, but still.
But still, when you get numbers like that, it should give us pause.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The development for children and fetuses are particularly at risk because of the exquisite timing of development.
Yes.
So if these hormone mimicking chemicals hit at that developmental timing place, they can have tremendous impacts on the development of children. And children are even more exposed because their body weight compared to the exposure and being on the floor and toys are being found to have a lot of toxic chemicals in them, and they're in their mouths, and it's just deeply concerning.
We'll be back to my conversation with Youpa Stein after this short break. A New Angle is proudly presented by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. This show does not happen without these pillars of our community, and I'm so grateful for their support and encouragement. And speaking of support, have you checked out our new website yet? anewanglepodcast.com. There you can support our show directly with a variety of subscription options. Subscribers get access to bonus episodes, additional segments, writings, and other benefits. So check it out at anewanglepodcast.com.
This is Mike Morelli, Executive Director at MCT, and you are listening to A New Angle.
Welcome back to A New Angle. I'm speaking with Youpa Stein, activist, artist, volunteer, and fierce advocate for removing plastics from our world. But let's stipulate that these health effects are some massive red flags. So in our remaining time, what do we do about it? How do we unwind this entrenched system of plastics? Where do we even start?
So one good place to start, we'll go from personal to global. One good way to start is to reduce your own personal exposure and the exposure of family and friends.
Yep.
Heating plastic, the chemicals in plastics are not tightly bound to the polymers. So they migrate freely, and they migrate more freely when there's heat or acidity.
So heating up leftovers in a Tupperware in the microwave seems like a bad idea.
And especially black plastic is
that's the
really
worst.
bad.
Okay.
And some of the black plastic that's used in like spatulas and things, recent report just came out. They're from recycled e-waste, particularly not good. But heating and microwave, not good. So protecting your family, your friends, yourself, as much as you can. Thinking about plastic, water in a plastic bottle, and sitting in a car that gets up to 105 degrees plus degrees.
Yeah.
So trying to mitigate when you can. And it's really hard because there's not accessibility, and everything has plastic, pretty much. And there's an affordability issue, too. It's not the best, safest choice should be the most available choice. And that's not the case yet. But so buying things in bulk, refill, reuse, that's one of the directions that it's important that we move. And so these are larger systemic changes. But whatever you can do in your own life to limit your exposure.
So with so many of these sorts of challenges in the climate space, it would seem that, individual choice and consumer preference as expressed through a market-based system is an important force. Yet, is it adequate to the task? What sort of systemic changes are you and your colleagues advocating?
One of the arguments we've heard in policy work, let the consumers drive the choice.
Sure.
So one of my questions is that if we don't have choices, how can that happen?
Right.
The scale is too big. We could never solve this on an individual action. Individual actions are necessary. It can be protective for your own, mitigate some of the harms, and there's a ripple effect. The UN Environment talks about the necessity to shift to solutions that's going to take governments to regulate, businesses to innovate, and individuals to act. And this is such a complex, entrenched issue that it's going to take all of these levels and layers and actions to make it work. And when you think about it in terms of mining in Montana, it wasn't the mining company Anaconda Mining Company that regulated itself. These are when there's such huge economic forces in play, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of money behind that pressure.
Yeah. Where are we meeting this challenge? Like, what are can you and your colleagues point to some wins? Like, that's a good law, or that's a good policy, or that country's got it right.
European countries are doing better at looking at banning whole chemical families.
Okay.
In the U.S., one scientist described it as whack-a-mole. Okay, bisphenol A, bad. We'll use bisphenol S, and then that turns out to be equally as bad.
And we are making some progress in fairness. Growing awareness of PFAS, and like the outdoor industry, for example, is eliminating DWR and things like that fall into some of this category.
One success in Montana is the legislature passed in 2021 a preemption bill that banned citizens' initiatives and local governments from regulating single-use plastics.
A ban against bans.
Yes.
Okay.
And so the primary argument for that law was that it was too hard for businesses to navigate a patchwork. Since then, there's been opportunities to pass statewide legislation, and it doesn't even make it out of committee.
Okay.
So there's a long, complex history in that area too. So a group of citizens, I'm one of them, represented by Cottonwood Environmental Law Center, sued the state, saying that House Bill 407 is unconstitutional in two ways. One of them is we have a constitutional right to citizens' initiative.
Yep.
So a judge ruled on the first part of that. That's been appealed and is at the state level, Supreme Court. But in the meantime, it is deemed legal, that we have a right to citizens' initiative. So recently, Bozeman just passed. They went through the citizens' initiative process, got a policy on the ballot to ban some unnecessary single-use plastics,
Okay.
and it passed like 12,000 to 7,000 something.
Okay.
So pretty convincing.
Yeah.
Citizens saying, wait, we want to, this is not okay to protect ourselves from unnecessary. There are some essential use plastics. Maybe we can figure out a way, hopefully, to make the to chemically be safer and less toxic, and how we design those products for their whole life cycle so that there's a safer, less health impacts. That some people are working on that.
Mm-hmm. Good.
And then this other work of how do we get to this pretty large systemic change around our relationship with unnecessary single-use plastics. That's about 40% of plastics. So if we can make some headway there, that's a pretty big chunk.
So let's pause on that. 40% of plastic is single use. So think of food service, convenience stores, groceries, hospitals, medical systems. Recycling appears to be somewhat mythology. Is that right?
So global statistic, what's usually quoted is about 9%. In 2021 in the U.S., it's like 5 to 6%. So it's cheaper to buy virgin plastic for production. So there's not a lot of market incentive.
Wow. Yeah.
Plastic degrades. So this plastic bottle it can't be turned into another plastic bottle. It gets downcycled. And
Sure.
eventually, all of that ends up landfill, incinerated, released into the environment. So we keep making more and more of it. We don't have a good way. It's polluting at every stage. So even if we had a really good way of taking care of it at the end, these frontline communities are bearing the Cancer Alley in Louisiana or along the Mississippi River, 95th percentile of cancers in the country. Who is paying the price? These are externalized costs. Part of the policy's movement is extended producer responsibility, that if you make this item, you have to pay for the dealing with it. So right now these costs are externalized.
So some mechanism to internalize the externalities.
And with the hope or the idea that would incentivize creating ways that there's less of these problems. So innovating better ways to do it, because if they don't, it's more expensive.
So I can imagine two types of listeners right now. One type of listener is freaking out about the exposure to plastics and feeling like, oh my gosh, how do I eliminate this from my life? The other potential listener is thinking, I can't even think about this.
Yeah.
How do you, we've talked about some of the places where you get a foothold to solutions, but outside of the specifics, how do you maintain hope that this is a solvable problem?
I believe our connection to each other, finding the ways that we can work together. I'm with the National Organization Beyond Plastics. I'm on their Volunteer Speakers Bureau. I'm connect with a network of affiliate and local groups. There's a lot of grassroots training and education, a lot of sharing of information. So we don't have to start from scratch. There are so many people working on these issues all over the world. And so for me to understand the impacts, but also understand what solutions people are finding. And we do have solutions. We have the technology. We know how to do it. We've lived without, it's really the over 9 billion tons of plastics that we've created since 1950. Half of that's been created since 2002.
Wow.
So this is a newer problem, but also there's so much we also know so much more, and our advances and our creativity we can figure this out.
Yeah.
It's not an impossible thing. It does require some change, and change is hard. It took me a while to figure out, okay, when I put my reusable bags, when I'm done unloading my groceries, I put them in a place where I'm going to see them and take them back to my car. But they're not impossible. One business in Bozeman, Town and Country, it's like they don't use single-use disposable carry-out plastic bags. They reuse boxes that products come in, and they encourage people to use reusable bags. And they're saving money. It's more of a shifting in how we think about things. If we're thinking about the true costs, we really can't not take action. It's like the suffering of animals, wildlife, humans. If we really hold that, how can we not innovate? Especially when we have the capacity. Like humans, we can do amazing things.
So for folks that want to learn more about how to get started, how to get involved, the various organizations you are affiliated with, where would you point them?
Locally in Montana, I'm a volunteer co-chair of the Families for a Livable Climate Plastics Working Group.
Okay.
And that's a statewide organization based here in Missoula, but statewide outreach. And our group is an affiliate of the national organization Beyond Plastics. Beyond Plastics is a great resource for learning more, education, connection. Plastic Pollution Coalition is a great way to connect. They have a current sign-on around the Global Plastics Treaty. There's so many really amazing National Resource Defense Council, Break Free from Plastics, Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. There are people locally, state, nationally,
all the levels,
globally, that are coming together to work on these issues. And I am always learning. So if there's a perception of some of what I'm saying doesn't mesh with your thoughts or your perspectives, let's talk about it. We can't find the solutions if we're just putting up barriers. That won't work. That won't work. It's like, how do we come together to figure it out? So there's an education piece, but also an empowerment piece. It's like taking action, any action, actually gives, and connecting with others provides the stepping stone for what we can do next. And that gives me hope.
Super.
Yeah.
Youpa, it's been fascinating learning about this. Fascinating and terrifying, and unfortunately not surprising. But thank you for your work, and thank you for telling us about it today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I look forward to more connecting.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. If you like what we do and want to support us directly, please consider a subscription at anewanglepodcast.com. A New Angle is recorded at Studio 49, a generous gift from UM alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. Our presenting sponsors are First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Kelly Larson is our producer. Maddie Jordan is our production assistant. VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music. And Jeff Meese is our master of all things sound. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.